This just in. People watch SEC football games. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis because of your participation. Please like the video, even if you don't agree with me. If you enjoy the content, share the videos out on social media, and you got to subscribe. That way you know when we're going live. All right, let's check out the SEC. Check out the previous videos as well, because we broke down the Pac-12. Of course, we started there because the Pac-12 hanging by a thread, trying to work out a media rights deal to determine where they stand and if they can stabilize the conference. Then, of course, the Big 12 playing off of that. Commissioner Brett Yormark is just salivating, waiting for the Pac-12 to fall apart to grab at least those four corner schools in the Pac-12. Washington, Oregon could be in play, so we analyzed the Big 12 television ratings. Why are we doing this? Because television ratings equal advertising dollars, which also equal what the networks and the media platforms are willing to pay, i.e. the Big 10 and its new $1.1 billion contract with roughly $80 to $90 million to pay per team, while the Big 12 is down at $31 million and the Pac-12 could be less than that. It means something. From a guy who looked at commercial logs at ESPN for 19 years and had access to every game, I can tell you that it means something. There's a difference between higher rated games, or those games that are anticipated to be higher ranked, and how much ad revenue comes in per spot versus the lesser games. So we check out the SEC and we check out some of the best ratings in college football. The SEC dominant on the field, and people watch the games. Let's first go week to week and see how SEC games compared with the rest of college football. Starting in week 1, the SEC posted 2 of the top 3 rated games in week 1. They also had 4 of the top 10 games that you see there, all non-conference games, and then a couple lesser watched games, of course, against a group of 5 opponents. In week 2, the SEC posted numbers 1, 2, and 3, the top 3 rated games in college football to the SEC, and 5 of the top 11. Then we go to week 3 and the first conference game that shows up in the ratings, and that is the 6th highest rated game of week 3. But the SEC had 3 higher ranked games than that, numbers 1, 3, and 4, and all 5 of these games on the list, top 13 in the nation in college football. So consider that. The SEC with 5 of the top 13, the other 4 conferences with the other 8 of the 13. How about that? When we look at week 4, conference play went to full throttle that week, and the SEC had the best rated game of the week, number 4, number 10. They also had 2 lesser non-conference games ranking at number 19 and number 26. In week 5, the SEC again, the top rated game in college football, and 3 of the top 5 in college football. Week 6, the SEC again with the best viewed game, and then number 3 and number 6 as well. So 3 of the top 6 games in week 6. On to week 7. And now here for a 4th consecutive week, the SEC had the top rated game in college football. 2 of the top 5, 3 of the top 10, 4 of the top 13. All right, finally in week 8, somebody else, it would have to be the Big 10, because the Big 10 and the SEC had the 15 most watched games in college football last year. So in week 8, we've got only 2 of the top 5 for the SEC. So this is a down week for the SEC, and they still had numbers 4 and 5 for the week. In week 9, also not the number 1 rated game, but number 2 and number 4, and then a strong finish, of course. Weeks 10 and 11, once again, the SEC at the top ranked game, and then in week 10 they also had number 2 and number 5. In week 11 they had 2 of the top 5, 3 of the top 6, and 4 of the top 8 most watched games in the land. When we move on to week 12, of course, those are the games in which a lot of the conference teams in the SEC are taking on their scrimmage games, and so not as strong there, but still strong with 2 of the top 5 games in all of college football, and then 2 that ranked at number 15 and number 29. And then finally, rivalry weekend, and the SEC finishes strong again. And they play a lot of those non-conference games, of course, in the SEC Eastern Division against the ACC, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, which was the second ranked game of the week. Now, there's a condition here. Just like the LSU-Florida State game in week 1, there was no competition for that game. So that game was played on a Sunday night, LSU-Florida State, Labor Day weekend. So no other games are being played. So that needs to be taken into consideration because most of these games, there are tons of college football games on in competition for the viewing audience. And the same thing here with Florida State playing on a Friday night on Thanksgiving weekend. So great rating, but no competition. Now let's look at just conference games because, of course, we can measure apples versus apples as opposed to apples versus oranges when you're looking at non-conference games and you have to consider the opponent. Now, also in our final summary video, we're going to look at the networks involved. We're going to look at the time slots involved because that factors into it. And of course, as we referenced earlier, the competition for these time slots, because sometimes you get lucky with a particular time slot where there's not much good competition, and then others are completely stacked with a ton of great games. But let's march through the SEC and the top 10 rated games for conference games in 2022. Let's start out with that Georgia-Tennessee game. Both teams were undefeated at the time. The second-ranked game on TV in all of college football for 2022, only to Ohio State, Michigan at 13 million. Bama, Tennessee was an epic game, 52-49 last-second field goal, and tons of people watched it on CBS. That was the third most viewed game in college football. And then the SEC also had the number 4 and the number 5 and 6 games. So the SEC had 5 of the top 6 watched games in college football. Looking at just games played within conference with Bama, Tennessee, Bama, Ole Miss, and Bama, LSU, followed by Texas A&M and Bama. All those were really good football games as well, which of course helps because you keep the audience through the fourth quarter. Then you have more Alabama Crimson Tide showing up at games number 6 and 7 against Auburn and Arkansas. And CBS, of course, had that SEC contract. They will no longer have it going forward with CBS going with the Big Ten, but then Florida, Georgia, of course, shows up. And consider this, all 10 games ranked higher and drew more viewers than the number 1 game in the Pac-12 between USC and UCLA at 4.55 million. Also, all of these games excluding Tennessee, South Carolina, which was just barely edged out by the top game in the ACC, Clemson and Georgia Tech. Same thing with the Big 12. The best game in the Big 12 in terms of a conference viewership was TCU and Texas at 5.03 million. So the SEC pretty much, its top 10 games did better than every other conference. The SEC accounted for 11 of the top 20 games in college football. Actually, if you want to be more specific, 11 of the top 18 in all of college football for 2022. Let's also break this down in terms of a tier structure. And again, this is going to make much more sense to you if you watch the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big 12 videos with the Big 10 still forthcoming. If you look at how many games eclipsed these various million mark standards. So the SEC plays 56 conference games. 32 are represented in the ratings that we reviewed on Sports Media Watch. Unfortunately, the SEC network ratings did not show up. I could not find them anywhere. If you can find them, please let me know in the comments section. But the SEC network ratings should be available because based on Nielsen standards and the television industry, there are no ratings available for a television network for the first 5 years, and then the ratings are available. The SEC network kicked off in 2014, so the ratings should be available. And actually, the SEC network ratings should be in the ballpark of the Big Ten network, which ranks pretty much on par with ESPN2 and with FS1 for the most part, maybe a little bit less. But the SEC network distribution is high. It's nearly as high as ESPN and ESPN2. So for it being just a conference-only channel should be extremely strong. Well, the SEC had 1 game over 13 million. It was only 1 of 2 games in all of college football in the regular season with over 13 million viewers. 2 over the 11 million mark then 3 over 8 million, 5 over 7 million, and you see on down the line, 30 games in the SEC had at least 1 million viewers. So 30 of the 32, there was only a game on ESPNU, and let's see, another game probably on ESPNU or one of the ESPN networks. Yes, it was an ESPN2 game between Mississippi State and Auburn. The EU game was against Florida and Missouri that had less than 1 million viewers. Otherwise, 30 of the 32 SEC games, at least 1 million viewers tuned in for. In fact, 30 of the 32 also had 2 million viewers. So 2 million views for the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC is a pretty strong audience, not necessarily the Big 10, but the other three conferences, and the SEC accomplished that in 30 of 32 network-rated games. The SEC championship game was, again, the most watched championship game, and it was kind of an odd year in which the championship games didn't mean a whole lot. They did in the Big 12, even though TCU eventually lost and still made the playoff. It appeared as though that they would need to win that game to make the college football playoff. The Pac-12 had meant everything because USC would have reached the playoff with a win over Utah, but they lost that game, so there was a playoff spot on the line. Clemson, North Carolina, both out of it. Conversely, Michigan in, Georgia in, did not need to win their conference championship games and won those in blowout fashion, so they weren't good football games and they were kind of meaningless to a certain extent. But the Big Ten and the SEC, again, had the highest championship game ratings, and the SEC was at number 1, edging out the Big Ten with almost 11 million viewers for LSU and Georgia. Add it all up, and you would have to say that the SEC edges out the Big Ten with a glut of games at the very top of college football. The Big Ten had the highest rated game, but then the SEC fills in the next 5 spots, and then it's pretty much balanced between the next 10 or 15 slots in terms of the most viewed between the Big Ten and the SEC. It's pretty incredible when you add it all up. Well, we're going to come back with the Big Ten television rankings for 2022. Then we're going to size it all up. We're going to put it together and weight the conferences against each other. Should be a fun time. We appreciate your feedback. You seem to be enjoying this series, looking at TV ratings and what they mean, because this is important. Now, number of people have come back and said, well, that's only one season. Okay, you're right. It's only one season. However, do you really believe that the SEC is this strong just one season? This is no aberration. These TV ratings have been consistent for a long, long time. The Big Ten, the SEC have the best TV ratings every year. It's not like the Big Ten was a strong number 2 just in 2022, and then before that were the 4th or 5th best ratings per conference. This is consistent year after year after year. Sure, it slightly fluctuates. There could be a good year for the Big 12 or a down year for the Big Ten, but it's the SEC and it's the Big Ten. That's all there is to it. Again, we're going to come back with a Big Ten video. We look forward to producing that and delivering that for you. And then we're going to put it all together. Please subscribe. Lock it in for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis of college football right here at the Voice of College Football.